March 24, 1944. Night air minus 30 degrees at 18,000 feet. A Lancaster bomber cutting through the dark, on the long, dangerous arc, home from Germany. In the back of that aircraft, inside a plexiglass bubble barely bigger than a closet, a young tail gunner watches the contrails of his own bomber smoke shimmer in the moonlight. And then he smells something every gunner recognizes before the intercom ever carries the words. Hot, acrid, electrical insulation and aviation fuel. Fire. His name is Nicholas Alchemade. Early 20s, RAF Volunteer Reserve. He sits in the rear turret, the Fraser-Nash capsule hanging off the tail like a glass bead on a string. 4 Browning 303s, nose out past the curved perspex. 2,000 rounds sit in trays beside his legs. Hydraulics whine as he nudges the foot pedals to scan. The turret is his world. A swivel chair, a lap strap, elbow pads worn smooth by hours of vigilance, and an inch of plexi between him and air cold enough to freeze skin in seconds. His parachute is not on his back. The turret is too small for that. The chute sits just inside the fuselage, a few steps forward, on a hook by the rear door. If the order ever comes, bail out. He must rotate the turret, align the narrow hatch with the fuselage opening, unclip his lead, scramble in, grab the pack, snap the chest-type hooks and go. Every gunner knows the drill. Every gunner knows the timing is cruel. Crew voices crackle on the intercom. The pilot calling headings, the navigator updating winds, the wireless operator checking for night fighter call signs on enemy frequencies, the bomb aimer swearing about searchlight cones that claw at the stream like white fingers. It's a Berlin night. Heavy flak, radar plots. The bomber stream has done what Bomber Command asks. Go in together, overwhelm, scatter the defenders with numbers. But beneath that swarm, hunters rise. Twin-engine night fighters climb under the bombers, where gunners rarely look. Upward-firing cannons, Schräger Musik, pointed bellies full of fuel. A burst, a blossom of fire, a bomber falling like a house set alight. Crews in training whisper the term. On operations, they stop saying it at all. Alchemade's turret hums as he watches their quarter. Stars above, cold and fat and indifferent. He sweeps, pauses, sweeps again. The Birmingham factory where he trained taught him to read night. The way a shadow against the stars is not a cloud but an aircraft. The way exhaust flames, if you see them, are already too late. He checks his oxygen hose, taps his heated suit leads, waggles the gun spade grips. He thinks about the lecture from the engineering officer. At this altitude, your Spitfire friends would be icing. You have 10 minutes of useful consciousness if you lose oxygen. 5 if you panic. Don't panic. The hit doesn't feel like a hit. It feels like the whole aircraft lurches sideways and then snatches itself back. The intercom explodes with voices and someone, maybe the mid-upper, yells, "Fighter, starboard AF too low." Alchemade stomps to bring the turret round and the world outside lights like a sunrise from below. Orange flood through the perspex, a hiss, then the clatter of shrapnel and the sound that is worse than flak, the long hungry roar of a fuel fire that has found wind. The starboard wing near the inboard tank is alight. Heat licks the tail. In the turret the temperature shifts from polar to oven in a breath. The oxygen line to Alchemade's mast kicks and the taste of rubber fills his mouth. He squeezes the triggers and the 4 Brownings hammer the night with 1,000 tiny fists. Tracers arc down into blackness. If anything is below them, it is either hit or already gone. The pilot calls it. We're hit. Prepare to. The sentence breaks on impact as the bomber shudders again. Night fighters don't play fair. They arrive, fire, bank away, and if you don't die in the first pass, they come again. The mid-upper's voice, clipped and steady, cuts through. Starboard wing well alight. Nick, you've got fire aft. He doesn't need telling. The plexiglass around his legs is starting to soften and deform like sugar near a flame. He can feel heat through the sheepskin of his boots. The hydraulics that power the turret are groaning, and in that groan he hears a word he never wants to hear in a turret. Jam. He tries the manual handle. The turret resists. The path into the fuselage, the little rectangular door that is the difference between a parachute and a coffin, won't line up. He stamps the foot lever, and it grudgingly moves. Slow. Too slow. Fire doesn't keep time with hydraulics. Bail out. Bail out. The pilot has seen enough. The Lancaster is a flying house when it's whole, and a funeral pyre when it is not. The engineer will shut the fuel cocks, but shutting fuel on a wing already burning is like locking the pantry after the kitchen explodes. Alchemade yanks the turret, shoulder muscles straining. The door kisses the fuselage sill. It will have to be enough. He squeezes through, ripping fabric on metal edges, and belly crawls into the rear fuselage, smoke filling his throat, heat beating at his back like a blacksmith's hammer. He reaches for the parachute hook by touch. He finds it by feel. He also finds the problem. Crisp and absolute in the same motion. The parachute pack is on fire. Training says there are 3 options when a chute is damaged: smother, replace, or brace and hope the silk still bites. At 18,000 feet with fire chasing your heels through a tunnel of aluminum, there is no smother and there is no replace. He can clip a burning bag to his chest, or he can choose not to. He has seconds. The rubber of his oxygen line has melted. Each breath is a slice of smoke. The cabin temperature has shifted from heat to something hotter than thought. He looks one last time down the fuselage toward the main door. Flames run like water along the floor. He looks down through the tail opening at the night. Every instructor drummed it in. Step forward, hook on, count to 10, pull. He has nothing to hook. In an instant that will either be stupidity, courage, or the only sane arithmetic left, he makes the choice that becomes his story. He does not clip the burning parachute. He does not try to fight through fire to the main door. He swings his legs into the night and lets go. Gravity, indifferent since the first stone fell on the first hillside, takes him. People imagine falling as wind and movement and screaming. At first it is none of those. At first it is quiet. The bomber leaves him. The fire goes with it. The noise of 4 Merlins drops into the earth like a coin in a well. And for a heartbeat, the cold is the only thing that exists. Then velocity builds. Air shreds his breath. The rush grabs his limbs and tries to throw them where it wants. He tucks, then spreads, then tucks again. Instinct wrestling with physics. Numbers help in empty air. Terminal velocity for a human in a belly-to-earth posture is around 120 miles per hour, about 55 meters per second. Feet first or head down can push that higher. Arms and legs wide can bleed it lower. 18,000 feet is roughly 3.5 miles. If a man fell all the way with no drag and no atmosphere, he'd hit in 20 seconds. But air saves fools and the desperate. It builds drag. Even so, from 18,000 feet to ground is about 1.5 minutes, if you never slow down more than physics allows. 90 seconds is enough time to live an entire life in thought. It is also not enough time to solve anything complicated. Breathing matters. Position matters. Luck matters most. Alchemade's heated suit no longer heats. At -30, the moisture in a man's eyes tries to crystallize. His mask is useless. He tears it away. He tastes night air that burns like cold iron. The stars are motionless above. The black under him resolves into a darker black. And then, in the last few thousand feet, shapes patches of paler ground, a different tone where trees stand, faint suggestion of snow. The bomber is far away now, a falling torch. Something in him has time to feel the grief of that, because bomber crews are families built in weeks. But grief is a luxury. He orients, feet down, knees slightly bent, arms close. He wants, if he can't slow, to at least fold in ways that won't break him, where he mustn't break. What saves people who should not be saved is not magic. It is time and distance, how far you travel while slowing down. Every meter of deceleration divides the violence. Cars have crumple zones. Skiers carve to bleed speed. Paratroopers, when their chutes fail, pray for trees and snow. A pine's upper branches are whippy. They strip energy snap by snap. Snow compresses like a spring and spreads force across more time. Air, tree, snow. 3 stages of breaking. If you are impossibly lucky, all 3 come in the right order. The ground arrives not as a hit, but as a conversation. First needles. Branch tips slash his face and hands in fast, stinging cuts. Then thicker limbs thump his thighs and hips. He crashes through a crown bough that would have speared him if he'd come in head first. Wood cracks. A branch tries to catch his armpit, and fails, tearing his sleeve clean. His body spins, his left knee twists. Gravity, indifferent and relentless, shoves him through the last lattice of twigs. He drops the final 20 feet and disappears into snow. He does not explode, he does not shatter, he does not die. He disappears into white to his chest, and stops like a stone in a pillow. The world goes still, the wind rush is gone, the heat of the fire is a memory that belongs to someone else. He pulls one hand free, and flexes fingers. They move. He takes inventory the way aircrew are taught to, after any violent thing. Toes, move. Ankles. Ankles complain but answer. Knees. One is angry and swelling. Hips. Sore. Intact. Spine. Pain but not the wrong kind of pain. Head. Clear enough to decide he is the most surprised man in Germany. He lies back, and for perhaps the first time in months, breathes without engine roar as soundtrack. A smell of pine. the sound of snow settling after it has been asked to do a ridiculous job. Somewhere far away, a distant thump, like a door closing, and a rising orange glow that means the Lancaster has arrived at Earth. His crew. He closes his eyes and opens them, because if he leaves them shut too long, the night will creep in and take the moment from him. Cold eventually insists. He claws himself out, sits on the snow, and touches his pockets like a man patting himself after a shock, to prove he is still there. Small things anchor reality. A clasped knife, a handkerchief turned stiff, a crumpled cigarette packet. The stories say he lights one. In some tellings he does, and the ember's tiny heat is the first fire he has wanted all night. In others, he simply sits and laughs like a lunatic, because the equation he has just solved has too much luck in it for math. Lights move between the trees. Voices. German. The war has not paused merely because gravity briefly forgot to kill him. He raises his hands, because adrenaline is done, and Iron Cross or no, a rifle makes its own laws. The men who step into the clearing are Wehrmacht, not SS. Older, tired, practical men who have spent months hearing bomber engines and counting cattle and roofs lost to incendiaries. They have seen wreckage and crews who did not make it. They have not seen this. Hands still raised, English accented with smoke. He says what he can say. Airman, RAF, tail gunner. He points up, then down, because I fell without a parachute. Seems a poor sentence to try first in a foreign language. They lower their weapons anyway. One of them, who has a face that says he has 2 sons and a wife, who worries about sugar rations, steps forward, puts a hand under Alchemade's elbow, and lifts him with care that has nothing to do with uniform. Procedure. The thing that rules armies even when fire tries begins. They take him to a field station. A doctor, who might have delivered babies last peacetime, probes bruises, wraps the sprained knee, and shakes his head with the same baffled smile doctors wear when fevers break after the body has no right left to fight. Someone brings tea or Asat's coffee. Someone else brings a blanket. He is a prisoner now, and prisoners still get blankets in armies that remember they are armies. The questioning begins that night, and continues the next day in a more official room. The duty officer has paperwork, a typewriter, and a problem. Prisoners claim many things to confuse interrogators, but some things you can verify. A wreck is a wreck. He sends men to the crater where the Lancaster finished. They return with a parachute pack charred to its harness rings. They bring bits of turret, a singed section of oxygen hose, a bent Browning casing. They find the other bodies. They plot the bomber's fall against the wind that night. They measure the distance from the wreck to the copse where farmers heard a crash in snow. They pace steps and scribble numbers. German staff work is meticulous even in winter. The officer looks at Alchemade, then at the evidence, and then he looks again at Alchemade. The way men look at objects that break rules you thought were physics, not policy. He asks, in careful English, if the airman jumped with a parachute. Alchemade says no. The officer asks again, to be sure, because if a man can walk away from the sky, he can also lie well. Alchemade repeats it. No parachute. The officer rubs his nose, a gesture that belongs to every overworked man in every war, and pulls a form from the stack. It is a certificate. He writes that on this night at this place, this man fell from approximately 18,000 feet without a parachute, and survived with minor injuries. He signs it. He stamps it with an eagle, because empires do not believe things until ink says so. POW camps are factories for rumor, but they also create their own tiny societies with doctors, cooks, men who teach languages, and men who tell stories. When they move him to a transit camp, then to a Luft camp for aircrew, the certificate goes with him. It is shown, folded, refolded, passed like contraband down a hut. There is skepticism from veterans who know the odds. There is laughter too, the kind that says if a man can beat gravity, the guards might yet miscount a roll call. But there is also what bomber crews always give each other, respect without needing all the adjectives. He fell. He lived. That sentence is enough. When winter loosens its grip, the camp loosens too. The war begins to move faster than guard schedules can adapt. The Russian front buckles west. The Americans cross rivers. Everyone thought would hold them longer. Prisoners feel it in small ways. Food changing. Guards quieter. Rumors thicker. The certificate becomes less talisman and more souvenir. Years later, after liberation, after debriefs where RAF officers listen and nod and write, verified by German field report, after trains that smell of fresh coal instead of fear, Alchemade will keep that paper. He will show it to people who widen their eyes and ask if he is making it up. He will smile the tight smile of men who have already spent the disbelief to get home. Numbers put his survival in context. Bomber Command loss rates in 1943-44 ran between 2 and 5% per raid. Over a tour of 30 missions, the arithmetic was savage. The coin toss of coming back or not. Tail gunners were especially vulnerable. The turret placed them outside the fuselage, armored in only thin plate, and the hope they would spot the streak of exhaust that meant a night fighter had set his sights. The parachute stored inside the fuselage bought a little space but stole seconds in emergencies, and when upward-firing cannons came into fashion, most gunners never even saw their killers. Against that field of odds, a man falling 3 miles without silk and walking away is not a miracle. It is a demonstration that the same physics that kills also spares if given distance and the right materials. Air, branches, snow, luck, yes, but luck amplified by trees and winter, and a decision taken in a tight tube of aluminum to choose night over fire. What makes his choice linger is not just the survival, it is the clarity with which crews in those years had to think about final options. Aviation manuals are full of checklists and angles. They also contain footnotes instructors speak, not write. If your wing is the color of the sun, no drill will save you. If you cannot get to the main door, do not die practicing with a prop that will never open. Apathy kills. Panic kills faster. Decision, even a terrible one, sometimes gives physics something to work with. Strip the story down to its engineering bones and it says this. At 18,000 feet, a human has roughly 90 seconds before ground, if falling in air and behaving as a poorly streamlined object. If during that 90 seconds, he can stack decelerations in sequence, air drag, flexible vegetation, compressible snow, the time over which his velocity goes to zero lengthens, peak forces drop, bones that would snap at deceleration over 1/10 of a second will bend if offered half a second. You can calculate it on a napkin, and dozens of physicists have in smoky pubs when this story is told. Of course, that napkin also has to include uncertainties. Canopy height, snow depth, branch elasticity, body posture. Engineers call it boundary conditions. Airmen call it luck. They meet in the middle over a beer and nod because both are true. There is a broader truth too, one that belongs less to physics and more to the strange fraternity of people who went to war in machines. Bomber crews looked after each other in the air, and when the air was taken from them in the wire, German aircrew respected that. More often than not, because most had been up there too in their own dark. The field officer pushing a certificate under a stamp is not just bureaucracy. It is also an acknowledgement across the lines. You beat something tonight, and we see it. Years after the war, when veterans gather in back rooms of pubs and at air shows where the roar of restored Merlins pulls memory tight, someone will tell his story again. The telling will change small things. The exact tree, the exact depth of snow, whether the cigarette was lit or unlit. But it will leave the spine intact, because the spine is strong. A young man in a turret weighed seconds against fire, chose sky, and the world briefly chose to be gentle. He did not beat the war, he beat gravity once. For men born into an age where machines stretched human lives into new shapes, that was enough. If you want the picture as a set of measured lines, here it is. Fraser-Nash turret, 4 Thoro 3 Brownings at roughly 1100 rounds per minute each. Effective range short. Tracer burnout at about 400 yards. Lancaster cruising at 200 miles per hour true. Returning altitude 18,000 feet. Outside air temperature -30 Celsius. Night fighter attack likely from below, with 2 20mm cannons firing at shallow angles into the wing route. Typical first burst causes fuel fire that spreads downstream. Time from hit to untenable cabin conditions, measured in tens of seconds when oxygen lines burn, and hydraulic fluid on hot metal turns to vapor. Path to parachute. Rotate turret to interior, unclip, crawl, clip chest pack. Proceed to main door or local exit. If flame blocks path and parachute pack is compromised, survivability with no chute is near zero in open fields, greater in forest with snow. If you want the picture as people carry it, here is that as well. A crew chattering about tea before takeoff. Laughter forced to bleed the edge off fear. A briefing board with red string lines ending over blacked out names. A pilot rolling a cigarette with hands that do not tremble until the match is blown out. An engineer counting tank capacities like a priest counts beads. A tail gunner tightening the strap of a seat he will leave in a way no manual contemplates. The moment he steps back into night, the quiet, then the shriek of air, then the needles, then the thump, then the hush. A man sitting in snow with hands that work, lights among trees, a blanket, a stamped paper, a wire fence he will one day walk out of. A life measured after that not in missions but in days that do not require numbers to be survived. There are other falls without parachutes in the records. A stewardess in peacetime blown from a damaged airliner. A rear gunner falling amid the wreckage of a Halifax and landing in Furs. You can line them up, tell yourself there is a category here. But categories do not reduce awe when a single human shape drops from the size of the sky and walks away. These outliers bend the curve of what we think is possible. They do not change the base rule from high enough without silk. The ground wins. Yet the army officer's stamp wasn't just for his file, it was for ours. It says without philosophy that survival sometimes ignores math. Think about what that meant in March 1944, when odds were mathematics more brutal than this. German cities burned. British cities still dug children from rubble. The people in the air were young men, and increasingly young women, trained in months to do jobs that used to take years to learn, because the wars had accelerated everything. They sat inside machines that multiplied human reach and human fragility. They did their jobs, not because they thought they would live a long time, but because the job had to be done by someone, and their name had been called. In that arithmetic, a single fall that ends in snow becomes a parable about how large numbers sometimes spare an individual in ways that feel like the universe blinking and letting one through. When you finish this story, if you look up the images, you'll see a smiling face that belongs to a peacetime photograph. He stands with sleeves rolled and hair combed in the way of that decade, a half grin that says more mischief than sorrow. Photographs are cruel lies that way. They freeze a moment before the thing that will define the man, but they also tell truth. He did not become only the fall, he became a man who had fallen and gone on. He did a war, did captivity, did release. He did the long quiet after. That is the part the certificate cannot record, and the part that actually matters. Bomber Command taught its crews a final lesson in every briefing. If you must go, go quickly. Don't look back. Don't take anyone with you who doesn't need to. Alchemade went quickly. He did not look back in the moment, because to look back is to lose precious seconds. He did not take any man with him into the night. He left the burning machine and trusted the dark with a decision born of training and the completely untrainable impulse to live. The rest was trees, snow, and the peculiar kindness of a world that is not often kind. In the after years, engineers would sometimes use his case to teach first principles: momentum, impulse, energy dissipation. They would sketch a pine, draw a stick figure, write V quadrate over 2 gram, calculate the deceleration needed to leave bones mostly whole. Pilots, when they told it, emphasized a different equation: seconds available, options still open, courage to pick one. Both are right, both honor what happened, because the truth sits where math and nerve meet, under a winter sky. If you're listening to this and thinking that war stories too often glorify the unglorifiable, remember this is not a tale about killing. It is a tale about a man choosing how to die and being refused by the ground. That refusal, stamped in ink by an enemy officer who believed his own eyes, is one of the small mercies in a cruel year. If you need comfort from numbers, take this one. Out of the thousands who did not come back, someone did in a way no one expected. If you need caution, take this. Trust training, use numbers, but keep a slice of mind for the moments when neither apply, and you have to decide with your whole self in a breath. That night began as just another mission into the black. It became a footnote that outlived the machines. It is still told because it lets us sit for a moment with a question war makes us ask, and physics sometimes answers kindly. How far can a human fall and still be human at the bottom? About 18,000 feet. One night in 1944, one man, one set of trees, one drift of snow, one decision taken in heat and smoke, and then footsteps in winter, because he could stand, and he did. Subscribe for more untold stories of WWII. This is a dramatized retelling based on historical records. Dialogue and some scene details have been reconstructed to convey the event faithfully.